September 19th, 1944, 00:07:15 hours. Aracourt, Lorraine, France. The morning fog clung to the French countryside like a burial shroud as Panther tank commander Karl Hoffmann peered through his cupola into the gray nothingness that consumed everything beyond 30 meters. His breath came shallow, not from the September cold, but from what his instincts were screaming at him even before his conscious mind could process it. Forward! 5 kilometers per hour. Maintain interval. The radio crackled with Major Eberbach's voice, calm and methodical. 42 Panthers of the 113th Panzer Brigade crept through the fog like blind predators, engines growling at idle, tracks grinding across wet earth. Hoffmann could barely see Lieutenant Weber's Panther 20 meters to his left, just a dark silhouette dissolving in and out of the mist. To his right, nothing. Behind him, the rest of the column was invisible, known only by the metallic clanking of treads and the occasional radio check. This was supposed to be routine. American screening forces, light resistance. The intelligence briefing had been clear. Scattered Shermans, perhaps some towed anti-tank guns. Nothing the Panther couldn't handle with its 75mm gun and sloped armor that had deflected Soviet shells at Kursk. Then the fog tore open for 3 seconds. A shape, low, fast, impossibly fast, burst from the tree line to Hoffmann's 10 o'clock. Not the lumbering advance of a Sherman. Not even the cautious probe of a reconnaissance vehicle. This thing accelerated like a staff car, like a machine that had forgotten it weighed 20 tons. Hoffmann's mouth opened to shout a warning. Before we continue, click that subscribe button, like this video, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It brings me great joy knowing that these war stories and lessons get to people all over the world. Your support helps us bring more thrilling war stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's get back to the story. The American vehicle fired twice, 2 sharp cracks that cut through the fog like lightning through cotton. Weber's Panther erupted. The first round punched through the side armor with a sound like a cathedral bell being struck by a sledgehammer. The second penetrated the engine deck. Flames mushroomed upward, painting the fog orange and black. Contact left! Contact! The American machine was already gone, vanished back into the mist before Hoffmann's gunner, Corporal Steiner, had traversed the turret even 45 degrees toward the threat. The hydraulic whine of the Panther's turret motor seemed pathetically slow, a dinosaur trying to track a hummingbird. "Where is it? Where is it?" Steiner's voice cracked with something Hoffmann had never heard from the veteran gunner before. Panic. The radio exploded with overlapping transmissions. "Taking fire from... Can't see them. They're too fast. Hartmann is hit. Hartmann is burning." Another crack. Another Panther ablaze. This one from the right flank. Then silence. The terrible silence of an enemy that refused to stand and fight. That struck and dissolved like smoke. Hoffmann's hands trembled as he gripped the cupola rim. In 3 years of combat from the Eastern Front to France, he had never felt this. The visceral, gut-deep terror of facing something that moved by rules he didn't understand. Through the fog, Weber's Panther continued to burn. The flames seemed impossibly bright against the gray void, a funeral pyre for German certainty. Somewhere in that fog was an enemy that didn't fight like tanks were supposed to fight. And Hoffmann's entire brigade was crawling blind into its killing ground. The genesis of the weapon that terrorized Karl Hoffmann began not in response to German armor superiority, but from a uniquely American engineering philosophy that emerged in the desperate winter of December 1941. Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Davis Bruce, commanding the newly established Tank Destroyer Center at Fort Meade, Maryland, had analyzed the German blitzkrieg not with the reverence of a military traditionalist, but with the cold logic of an engineer dissecting a flawed machine. While Wehrmacht theorists continued their obsessive march toward heavier armor and larger guns, Panzer III to Panther to Tiger, Bruce arrived at a revolutionary and borderline heretical conclusion. Why meet German steel with thicker American steel in grinding heavyweight slugfests when you could create a weapon that struck with devastating firepower and vanished before the enemy acquired the target? Bruce's vision demanded three characteristics, ranked in radical priority: speed, firepower, and crew coordination. Armor protection, the sacred obsession of German tank development, ranked a distant, almost negligible fourth. To the Wehrmacht, this would have been dismissed as suicidal madness. To American engineers, freed from decades of European tactical doctrine, it was liberation. The Ordnance Department issued specifications that reflected this philosophy. Create a fast tank destroyer using torsion bar suspension, a right continental radial engine, and sufficient firepower to kill any German tank from the flank. The design evolved rapidly through various prototypes with different armaments until the T-70 76mm gun motor carriage emerged in late 1942, the vehicle that would become the M18. But the true revolution came when production was assigned to Buick's Flint, Michigan plant in July 1943. Buick didn't build tanks. Buick built automobiles. And the design team, led by engineers who had spent careers perfecting acceleration, handling, and power-to-weight ratios for civilian performance cars, approached the M18 with a racing philosophy that would have horrified German armor engineers. Strip away everything that doesn't contribute to speed. Minimize weight ruthlessly. Maximize power output. Optimize suspension for high-velocity maneuvers across rough terrain. The result was a vehicle that looked less like a traditional tank destroyer and more like a race car that happened to mount a 76mm cannon. Powered by a 9-cylinder, 400-horsepower Wright R975 radial aircraft engine, the same power plant used in the 33-ton M4 Sherman. The M18 weighed just 20 tons. The power-to-weight ratio was staggering, 20 horsepower per ton compared to the Panther's pathetic 11. The numbers told a story that German tank commanders would learn in blood. The M18 Hellcat could achieve 55 miles per hour on roads, with some crews reporting sustained speeds of 60 miles per hour in ideal conditions. The Panther's maximum speed of 29 miles per hour suddenly seemed not just slower, but obsolete, the difference between a thoroughbred racehorse and a draft animal. More devastatingly, the Hellcat could maintain 40 miles per hour across rough terrain where Panthers struggled to exceed 15. It could accelerate from dead stop to 30 miles per hour in under 10 seconds, a maneuver that required nearly 30 seconds for the heavier German tank. By September 1944, when the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion deployed its M18 Hellcats to Lorraine, the Americans had created something unprecedented: the fastest tracked armored vehicle in World War II. Not just marginally faster. Faster in an entirely different category of warfare. German doctrine had perfected the tank. America had invented something new. September 18, 1944. 2100 hours. One day before the slaughter. Major Klaus Eberbach studied the tactical map spread across the hood of his command vehicle, illuminated by a shielded flashlight. The 113th Panzer Brigade's route to Aracourt looked straightforward, perhaps too straightforward, but German intelligence had been reassuring. American 4th Armored Division here. His finger traced the position. Screening forces, mostly Shermans. Some towed anti-tank guns. Nothing we haven't handled before. The intelligence briefing had been clear, almost dismissively so. The Americans were stretched thin after their rapid advance across France. Their armor was mechanically unreliable after weeks of sustained operations. They would likely withdraw rather than stand and fight against superior German steel. What the Luftwaffe reconnaissance flights hadn't detected, what German intelligence hadn't even considered looking for, were the low-profile silhouettes of M18 Hellcats that had moved into position after nightfall. The Americans had learned from brutal experience. Don't dig in until the last possible moment. Move under darkness. Let the enemy think the ground is clear. September 19, 1944. 06:30 hours. American positions near Rechicourt-le-Petit. Lieutenant Edwin Leiper crouched beside his M18, watching the fog settle across the French countryside like a tactical gift from God. Around him, 3 more Hellcats from Company C, 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, sat motionless in carefully selected hull-down positions behind hedgerows and farm buildings. "Engines at idle," he whispered into the radio. "No movement until I give the word." The M18s waited like coiled springs, their right radial engines purring so quietly they were nearly inaudible beyond 50 meters. The crews had practiced this for months. The art of the ambush, the discipline of patience, the predator's instinct to let prey walk into the killing zone before revealing yourself. Leiper checked his watch. German armor was expected at dawn, right on schedule for men who still believed in timetables and orderly advances. The fog would help. The Germans would advance slowly, cautiously, their visibility reduced to nothing. Their massive Panther turrets would traverse like arthritic joints in the cold morning air. And when they finally detected the threat, their doctrine would demand they stop, acquire targets, and engage, the textbook response that assumed the enemy would stand and fight. The M18 crews had been drilled on a different philosophy. Hit, move, hit again. Never be where the enemy expects. Never give them time to respond. 07:15 hours. Through the fog, Leiper heard them before he saw them. The distinctive grinding of Panther tracks, the deep rumble of Maybach engines, the metallic symphony of 42 tanks advancing in formation. The sound grew louder, closer, more confident. German radio chatter crackled through the intercept receiver, untranslated but unmistakable in tone. Calm, methodical, assured. They had no idea. Leiper raised his hand, watching the fog. Through a momentary gap in the mist, he caught his first glimpse, the angular silhouette of a Panther's bow, barely 30 meters away, moving at walking speed. "Contact," he whispered. "Multiple Panthers, direct front." His gunner, Corporal Hayes, already had the 76mm gun laid on target. The loader confirmed. AP loaded. Leiper watched 3 more Panthers materialize from the fog, advancing in a neat tactical formation that assumed clear fields of fire and predictable enemy positions. His hand dropped. "Fire!" The M18's gun roared. The first Panther staggered as the round punched through its side armor. Before the German crew could even process what had happened, Leiper's driver slammed the accelerator, and 20 tons of American steel exploded forward at a speed that violated every German assumption about how tracked vehicles moved. The trap had sprung, and the Panthers had walked into it blind. The first M18 Hellcat fired, reversed, and was already accelerating to a new position before the Panther's turret had rotated even 45 degrees toward the muzzle flash. 0 to 30 miles per hour in 8 seconds. The German gunner's optics were still tracking empty air when Lieutenant Leiper's Hellcat materialized 60 meters to the right, fired again into a second Panther's flank, and vanished back into the fog like a mechanical ghost. The stricken German tank shuddered, smoke erupting from hatches as the crew bailed out into the gray morning. What unfolded across the killing fields near Aricourt wasn't a battle. It was a systematic dissection. American speed against German steel, and steel was losing catastrophically. "Contact right." "Traverse right!" Major Eberbach screamed into his radio, but the words were meaningless. By the time a Panther's 7-ton turret completed its agonizingly slow 60-second full rotation, the M18s had already fired, relocated, and engaged from an entirely different angle. The Germans were fighting ghosts that refused to hold still long enough to be killed. The American radio network hummed with clinical precision. Baker 2-1, I'm marking target at your 10 o'clock. Confirmed, engaging. Charlie 1-3, displace now. They've got your position. The M18 platoons operated like a single predatory organism. Their SCR 508 radios enabling coordination that German crews, still relying on hand signals and limited voice communication, couldn't match. When one Hellcat drew fire, two others were already flanking. When Germans finally acquired a target, it was gone, replaced by muzzle flashes from 3 different directions. A Panther commander, desperate to close the distance and bring his superior armor into play, ordered full throttle. The 45-ton beast lurched forward, Maybach engine roaring, tracks chewing earth, and managed barely 20 miles per hour across the rough terrain. The M18 he was chasing hit 40. The Panther's engine temperature spiked. Warning lights flashed. The driver screamed that they were overheating, that the transmission was grinding, that the final drive was about to fail. The commander watched helplessly as the American tank destroyer pulled away effortlessly, weaving between hedgerows like a sports car on a country road. Then it stopped, traversed its lightweight turret with mechanical speed that seemed impossible, and fired. The Panther died without ever getting into effective range. Across the battlefield, the pattern repeated with brutal efficiency. A Panther would detect an M18, attempt to engage, and find itself shooting at fog. Seconds later, American 76mm rounds would tear through side armor from a completely different angle. The killing shots that German sloped frontal armor was irrelevant against. One Panther threw a track trying to execute a high-speed turn its suspension wasn't designed for. Another's transmission seized, leaving it immobilized, a static target. A third simply stalled, its engine flooded from the panicked stop and start maneuvering its crew wasn't trained for. 07:20 hours, 5 minutes after first contact. 5 Panthers burned. One M18, Sergeant Morrison's vehicle, sat disabled with a damaged drive sprocket, hit by one of the few German rounds that found a target. The exchange ratio was apocalyptic, 5-1 in favor of the Americans. And the M18s were just warming up. 07:30 hours. Inside Panther 217. Karl Hoffmann's hands wouldn't stop shaking. He had commanded armor through 3 years of the Eastern Front. Kharkov, Kursk, the desperate retreats of 1943. He had faced Soviet T-34s in swarms, their crude but effective 76mm guns punching through side armor, while German 88s killed them at range. He had dueled KV-1 heavy tanks in point-blank street fighting where survival was measured in seconds. None of it had prepared him for this. "Commander, orders?" Corporal Steiner's voice cracked. The veteran gunner, a man who had calmly engaged targets at Prokhorovka while the world burned around him, sounded like a child lost in the dark. Hoffmann opened his mouth. Nothing came out. What orders could he give against an enemy that moved faster than his turret could traverse? What tactics applied when the fundamental equation of armored warfare, see first, shoot first, kill first, had been inverted? The radio dissolved into chaos. "They're everywhere. I can't track them. Neumann is burning, Jesus Christ. They hit him from behind, and he never even saw. Request permission to withdraw. We're sitting ducks out here." Sitting ducks! The phrase hung in Hoffmann's mind. That's what they were now. The mighty Panthers, the technological marvels of German engineering, reduced to slow-moving targets for an enemy that struck like lightning and disappeared like smoke. Panther 234, Lieutenant Hans Weber's surviving crew. "I've been fighting since Poland," Weber said into the radio, his voice hollow. "France, Yugoslavia, Russia. I have never faced anything that moves like this." His loader, a 20-year-old from Bavaria named Ernst, was openly weeping. "They're playing with us. They could have killed us twice already, but they're just toying with us, showing us how helpless we are. Weber didn't correct him because Ernst was right. The American tank destroyers were hunting with a cruel efficiency that went beyond simple tactics. They would appear, engage, vanish, then reappear from a completely different direction just to prove they could. Every displacement screamed a single message. You can't catch us. You can't even see us. You're already dead, you just don't know when. The confidence that German crews had carried from the Eastern Front, the bone-deep certainty that their Panthers were superior to any Allied armor, was evaporating like the morning fog. They had been the hunters, the predators, the elite. Now they understood what Soviet tank crews must have felt in 1941, facing German Panzers that moved with tactical precision while their own T-26s crawled to their deaths. Except this was worse. The Soviets had eventually learned, adapted, and built better tanks. What could Germany adapt to? Speed itself? Panther 209, Major Eberbach's command tank. Eberbach stared at the tactical map, now marked with 8 burning Panthers. 8, in less than 20 minutes. Against an enemy they had barely seen. His radio operator looked at him, waiting for orders. Eberbach had commanded Panzers since 1940. He had written tactical doctrine. He had trained crews on the principles of armored warfare, mobility, firepower, protection, the holy trinity of tank combat. The Americans had just proven the trinity was a lie, or rather, they had revealed a hierarchy the Germans had never considered, that mobility, true mobility, overwhelming speed, rendered protection almost irrelevant. "Sir?" the radio operator pressed. Eberbach's voice came out barely above a whisper. "Tell all units. Halt advance. Defensive positions only. Do not, under any circumstances, pursue." The order tasted like ash. The admission of defeat before the battle had even truly begun. But what else could he do? Send his Panthers charging blindly after enemies that moved twice their speed? Watch them burn one by one, helpless and humiliated? For the first time in his career, Klaus Eberbach understood fear not of death, but of obsolescence. The arithmetic of the Battle of Aricourt told a story far more devastating than the tactical defeat unfolding in the fog-shrouded French countryside. It was a story written not in doctrine or courage, but in industrial mathematics that Germany had no equation to solve. Each Panther tank that burned in the fields near Rechicourt-le-Petit represented approximately 2,000 man-hours of German manufacturing labor. The tank's complex Maybach HL-230 engine alone required hundreds of precision-machined components. The sophisticated hydraulic turret traverse system demanded specialized tooling. The interlocking road wheel arrangement, designed for optimal weight distribution, required manufacturing tolerances that slowed production to a crawl. MAN, Daimler-Benz, and MNH factories across the Reich were producing roughly 40 Panthers per week in September 1944, a rate considered impressive given the strategic bombing campaign systematically destroying German industrial capacity. Every Panther lost at Aricourt represented nearly half a day of total German tank production. The 8 Panthers destroyed in the first 20 minutes? Nearly a full week of the Reich's armored output, erased in less time than it took to brew morning coffee. The M18 Hellcat told a different story entirely. Buick's Flint, Michigan plant had applied mass-production automotive techniques to military vehicle manufacturing with ruthless efficiency. The M18's open-topped turret eliminated complex welding operations. Its lightweight construction required less specialized steel. The Wright R975 radial engine was already in mass production for multiple vehicle types, creating supply chain efficiencies German manufacturers could only dream of. 500 man-hours. That's what it took to build an M18 Hellcat from raw materials to battlefield-ready weapon. 1/4 the time required for a Panther. Buick was producing approximately 100 M18s per month by September 1944, with capacity to surge production if needed. The single Hellcat lost to German fire at Aracore, Sergeant Morrison's vehicle with the damaged drive sprocket, would be replaced within 48 hours. The crew would receive a new vehicle before the week ended, pulled from the steady stream of Hellcats flowing from American factories that operated 3 shifts per day, every day, without interruption from strategic bombing. The disparity extended beyond simple production numbers into the realm of strategic impossibility for Germany. American factories weren't burning. American supply lines weren't being interdicted by partisan attacks. American workers weren't being drafted into last-ditch infantry formations to plug gaps in collapsing fronts. The arsenal of democracy, a phrase that had seemed like propaganda rhetoric in 1942, had become the cold reality that would bury the Third Reich under an avalanche of steel. Germany could not afford to lose Panthers in combat. Each loss was irreplaceable in any meaningful time frame. Each crew killed represented months of training that couldn't be duplicated. America could afford to lose Hellcats by the dozen. The factories would simply build more. The crews would be replaced. The doctrine would be refined through lessons learned and distributed across the entire armored force within weeks. This was the terrible truth that Major Eberbach and his surviving Panther commanders were only beginning to comprehend as they huddled in defensive positions, afraid to advance, unable to retreat. They weren't just losing a battle. They were losing a war of industrial capacity they had never stood a chance of winning. Every minute the M18 Hellcats hunted German armor, American factories were building the replacements for tomorrow's battles. The math was inescapable. The outcome, inevitable. Germany was being outproduced into extinction. September 20th, 1944. 0600 hours. 5th Panzer Army Headquarters. General Hasso von Manteuffel stared at the after-action reports from Aracore with the expression of a man watching his life's work crumble into irrelevance. The papers spread across his desk told a story that violated every principle of armored warfare he had spent 2 decades mastering. The 113th Panzer Brigade had begun September 19th with 42 operational Panthers. By nightfall, 26 were destroyed or disabled. Not across days of grinding attrition. Not in a desperate last stand against overwhelming numbers. But in a series of sharp, brutal engagements where German crews reported the same impossible phenomenon. American tank destroyers that moved too fast to track, struck with surgical precision, and vanished before countermeasures were possible. Von Manteuffel had commanded Panzers since the French campaign. He had personally developed tactics for the Panthers' employment on the Eastern Front. He understood, better than perhaps any officer in the Wehrmacht, the delicate balance of mobility, firepower, and protection that made German armor doctrine effective. The M18 Hellcat had just proven that doctrine obsolete. "Get me 5th Panzer Army Communications," he said quietly. His aide moved immediately, knowing the tone that preceded career-defining orders. Von Manteuffel drafted the directive in his own hand, each word a nail in the coffin of German armored supremacy. All Panzer units engaging American forces in Lorraine sector. Effective immediately, Panthers and other armor are forbidden from pursuing enemy tank destroyers. Engage only from prepared defensive positions. Do not, repeat, do not attempt mobile counterattacks against high-speed American armor. Maneuver warfare against this enemy is suspended until further notice. He signed it, handed it to his aide, and felt something fundamental break inside his chest. The order rippled through 5th Panzer Army within hours, and with it came the unspoken admission that German tank crews understood immediately. We cannot fight them in the open. We can only hide and hope they come to us. Panthers, designed for breakthrough operations, for fluid mechanized warfare, for the aggressive maneuver tactics that had shattered Poland and France, were now relegated to static defensive positions. Mobile fortifications, glorified bunkers with tracks they were forbidden to use. The Blitzkrieg was dead. Killed not by Allied numerical superiority or strategic bombing, but by American engineers who had built a machine that moved faster than German doctrine could adapt. In command posts across Lorraine, Panzer commanders read von Manteuffel's order and recognized it for what it truly was, an epitaph for German armored warfare. The tanks that had revolutionized combat in 1940 were now being ordered to abandon the very mobility that made them revolutionary. Major Eberbach, reading the directive in his surviving command Panther, laughed, a hollow, bitter sound that made his crew flinch. "Do not pursue," he repeated, "as if we could." His radio operator, young and still naive enough to believe in German invincibility, asked quietly, "Sir, does this mean—" "It means," Eberbach interrupted, "that we've already lost. We just haven't admitted it yet." The tactical implications were immediate. German Panthers, designed with 11 horsepower per ton for mobile operations, would now sit stationary, their mobility advantage, such as it was, nullified by command order. Their thick frontal armor, engineered to deflect enemy fire during aggressive advances, would become their only virtue. But frontal armor meant nothing when M18 Hellcats simply refused to attack from the front. The Americans had forced Germany to fight a defensive war with offensive weapons. And defensive weapons don't win campaigns. They only delay the inevitable. Von Manteuffel knew it. Eberbach knew it. Every Panther commander who read that order knew it. The question wasn't whether Germany would lose Lorraine. The question was how many more Panthers would burn before High Command admitted what battlefield reality had already proven. The age of the German Panzer had ended in the fog at Aricourt. By the time the Battle of Aricourt concluded on September 29, 1944, the M18 Hellcat had achieved something unprecedented in armored warfare history. A kill-to-loss ratio that would never be equaled by any American armored fighting vehicle in World War II. The numbers told a story that military historians would analyze for generations. 89 German tanks destroyed for the loss of 7 M18 Hellcats. Not 8-1 or 10-1, but nearly 13-1. A ratio so lopsided it seemed statistically impossible against an enemy operating some of the most sophisticated tanks ever built. But the true legacy of the Hellcat extended far beyond the burning Panthers left in the fields of Lorraine. What Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Bruce had envisioned in December 1941, a radical reimagining of armored combat that prioritized speed over steel, had proven itself not just viable, but dominant. The M18 hadn't simply won battles. It had rewritten the fundamental principles of tank warfare, the principles that survived. When American engineers began designing the M1 Abrams in the 1970s, they inherited lessons written in blood at Aricourt. The Abrams gas turbine engine produces 1,500 horsepower, not to make the tank heavier, but to maintain a power-to-weight ratio that emphasizes mobility. Its turbine can accelerate 68 tons to 45 miles per hour, channeling the Hellcat's philosophy. Speed is survival. The German Leopard 2, developed in the same era, abandoned the Panther's doctrine of maximum armor for a balanced approach that prioritized mobility and firepower. Its 1,500 horsepower engine and sophisticated suspension system allow aggressive maneuver warfare. The very tactics von Manteuffel's order had forbidden German Panthers from attempting. Israel's Merkava tank, designed for the unique demands of Middle Eastern warfare, incorporates lessons directly traceable to Aricourt: rapid acceleration, superior crew communication systems, and the tactical flexibility to engage and disengage at will. Speed as a defensive virtue, not just an offensive tool. Every modern main battle tank carries the DNA of the M18 Hellcat, the understanding that mobility, communication, and coordinated maneuver can overcome raw armor protection. The voices that remembered. In post-war interviews, German tank veterans, men who had faced Soviet armor at Kursk and British Shermans in Normandy, were asked what weapon they feared most. The answer, repeated with unsettling consistency, was always the same. "The Hellcat," said former Panther commander Wilhelm Hoffmann in a 1978 interview, "not the Sherman, though there were so many, not the Soviet T-34, though they were aggressive. The Hellcat, because you couldn't fight it, you couldn't catch it, you couldn't predict it. It made us feel obsolete." Another veteran, Hans Weber, put it more bluntly. "We were driving 45-ton coffins against an enemy that moved like ghosts. Our armor meant nothing because they never gave us the chance to use it." The revolution complete. The M18 Hellcat served through the end of World War II and into the Korean War. But its operational lifespan was ultimately brief. Post-war doctrine evolved. Heavier tanks returned to prominence. The Hellcat was retired, melted down, forgotten by popular history, in favor of the more numerous Sherman and the more famous Tiger. But its ghost haunts every modern battlefield where tanks maneuver at high speed, coordinating through digital networks, striking from unexpected angles, and vanishing before the enemy can respond. The German Panther represented the perfection of one philosophy: armor and firepower conquering through raw superiority. The M18 Hellcat represented something more dangerous, a weapon that refused to fight on the enemy's terms, that rewrote the rules, that proved speed and adaptability could shatter certainty. Arracore wasn't just a battle. It was the moment armored warfare entered the modern age. And it happened because American engineers asked one revolutionary question: what if we built a tank that runs like it's being chased?